fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery with your hosts, Eric Shapiro, David North Martino, John Copenhaver, and Al Warren.
Heard on KCP 106.5 FM Los Angeles,
102.3 FM Riverside,
and 105.0 AM Palm Springs.
Welcome back into the House of Mystery. I'm Al Warren. Mr. John Copenhaver, how you doing?
I am doing very well on this chilly day in, what month are we in? January?
It's all a blur. Actually, it's warming up where I am. In the West, we're getting the warm stuff already now, so we'll be getting in.
I'm headed up to the Mystery Writers of America board meeting, and it looks like snow is headed to New York City, so I'm like bracing for an unpleasant travel day tomorrow, but maybe I'll get lucky.
Yeah, maybe you'll miss it. It makes travel the worst, especially on planes. Well, okay, now here we go. We've got a returning guest, great writer. His new book, Who to Believe, a twisting domestic thriller. Mr. Edwin Hill, how you doing?
Oh, I'm great. Thanks so much for having me today.
Well, this is wonderful. So what's going on in your life? What's new in since you've been here last? You got the new book out, but what else is going on?
Oh my goodness, what has happened in the last 2 years? Well, I've been teaching at Emerson College, which has been great. I've been doing a lot of editorial work as well. I'm, of course, like a good crime novelist, I'm working on another novel right now as I promote this one. So that has been at the back of my mind, or the forefront of my mind for the last many months. And I'm excited about that one. I'm more excited about having that one be done because it's been kind of a bear to write.
Yeah, sometimes it is, isn't it? Yeah, big relief when it gets finished. When you do so much editorial work in that, does that affect you when you're writing? Are you really tough on yourself?
I mean, I like to think that I'm a good editor, so I do hand in pretty clean manuscripts to my editor, which I think he appreciates. I really enjoy the final stage of the editorial process when you're really going in and looking at a manuscript on a sentence level, looking for, the words that you're relying on a little bit too much, getting rid of those. When I'm drafting a novel, it's like word count is always at the back of my mind, especially as I'm creating the first drafts. And once I get over a certain word count, I always relax a lot. And so I always know with the final stages of editorial, when I'm starting to reduce the length of the novel, and I'm actively trying to reduce the length of the novel, that's when I start to know that I've really gotten the story right, because I'm no longer focused in on that word count issue.
So that must be quite a struggle. I could just see you sitting there with yourself in the room, arguing back and forth in two different voices.
It's true. I mean, like, one of the things that I think a lot of writers do, I certainly do it when I'm writing a draft, because I'm really trying to get words on the page, I'll often write terrible sentences and include like clauses within those sentences that I know will ultimately get cut out, or even like long passages of a character driving somewhere, even though I know I'll cut all of those words out about the actual act of driving. But it's just useful to actually go through go through the activity of getting those words on the page. So I actually don't have a lot of voices in my head. I actually am pretty clear cut when it comes down to it, and I know where I've overstepped and something needs to come out.
But I imagine you've got to do that. You got to kind of do what was some of the people say, they could word vomit or whatever they say. You just got to put it out because it puts you in the right frame when you're writing, right?
That's exactly right. Yep.
I know there's people that do it the other way, but I don't know how. It doesn't, that's not me. So Who to Believe? Tell us, what's the premise of this book?
Oh, sure. I'm really excited about this book. It's a standalone novel. If anyone's read my series, this does have one character from my series who makes an appearance, but it's a minor character, minor appearance. But this novel takes place in a small town on the southern coast of Massachusetts, which is a beautiful area of Massachusetts that's still a little bit undiscovered, not as much as it was 10 years ago. But it starts when a local woman, a local restaurateur named Laurel Thibodeau, is murdered by asphyxiation in her own home. As often happens with these cases, suspicion immediately falls on her husband and business partner, Simon. He has gambling debts and recently took out a large life insurance policy. And he also has a rock solid alibi. Laurel, it turns out, has made some sketchy decisions herself. She's been stealing money from local elderly people. So that's how the whole thing starts. You learn that all on the very first page. Then what we do is we fast forward about a week, and this is a tiny little town where everyone has an opinion on what might have happened. And so a group of friends gets together to celebrate one of their birthdays, and each of them has their own take on the story. And what I did with this novel is I was inspired by a movie from the 50s called Rashomon, also by a TV series called The Affair, which ran about 10 years ago. And what I did is I broke the narrative up into 6 parts that are about equal. And each part is told by one of the party attendees. We go through and look at the events of the night through each of their POVs, and the story builds on each other. So you'll look at some of the same events through different lenses, and you'll learn different things. And I don't think I'm giving anything away when I tell you that someone at that party is guilty, and someone at that party doesn't make it through to the end.
Whose voice do you put it in? Do you put it in one or several?
It's in 6 different voices. And so each part is told from a specific point of view. So like the first sixth of the novel is told by a guy named Farley Drake, and he is a psychiatrist who sort of has a nasty habit of getting too close to his clients. And then so we switch. The second part is told by a woman named Alice Stone, who's a financial planner, and we look at the party through Alice's point of view, but we also look at surrounding events through Alice's point of view. So we learn more about what's going on and what her secrets are, what secrets she brings to that evening. And then we do that with a number of other characters as well.
Do you find it difficult to do it that way? Do you find is it a struggle to try and keep it correct, when you go from so many different voices?
Actually, that is such a good question. This was such a different way of writing a novel because so many details there were so many details that you had to get right. So, I'd be working on Farley's scene, and, maybe they were eating ratatouille in Farley's scene, and then I'd be working on Alice's scene, and all of a sudden they were eating spaghetti carbonara, and I'd be like, then I'd have to go through and I'd have to find all the instances of that detail and decide whether or not they should be different or the same. Because one of the things with a Rashomon story like this is everyone has a different perception, right? And so sometimes people would remember something differently than someone else, and sometimes they'd remember things exactly the same. Generally, people remember what they had for dinner, so those types of details really had to be carefully managed.
I mean, first of all, that seems, and I've played around with perspective in my own writing a bit, but particularly the fine details and different perspectives on the same event is a challenge. First of all, I guess my first question is, what drew you to the looking at a story through different perspectives? I mean, why was that interesting to you from a theme or even craft?
I love point of view. I mean, think about going to the innocuous example I like to talk about is think about you going to a party or me going to a party. I often go to parties. I'm like an awkwardly social person. So I'll go to a party, I'll say something dumb, and I'll think that that dumb thing has resonated throughout the entire party and everyone's talking about it. And of course, in real life, that's only me that brings that point of view to that party. No one else even noticed the thing that I said. And so I love this idea of the view of the world, the view of exchanges between people, and how people's feelings or the secrets that they're keeping sort of inform everything that they're doing, and how people see things how people can see the same experience completely differently. It's also super exciting as a storyteller for this to to look at the same sequence of events and see how they can be altered with each point of view. So one of the things that I really wanted to do with this novel is that each time you enter a new POV, each time you enter a new character's experience, whatever has been seen before is completely turned on its head. So like, I'll give an example. This doesn't give too much away. But there is a birthday cake in this story because there's a birthday. And as I was writing about the party and the cake started to take on different meanings for different characters. And the cake wound up informing who the characters were. Like, were they nice people? Were they selfish people? Were they paranoid people? And I used that object to help the reader see how each of these characters were different from each other. And I didn't mean to do that with the cake as an example. I actually didn't even mean to do that with that particular object. But as the novel sort of progressed and the cake kept sort of coming back in scene after scene, eventually, like like any novelist, you have to be like, if this thing is in the story and it's getting mentioned this many times, it's got to have some level of importance, right? And so then I had to think through myself, what is important about this cake? And I managed to make it important to enough characters to really keep all of those references in there.
You think that, it's a really novel way of trying to reveal character, particularly taking an object like a birthday cake and having different characters interpret it, essentially, is what you're doing. It's all up for interpretation. Is there, certain things you felt could be open to interpretation, perhaps for emotional reasons, but other elements that just had to be kind of locked in place? Or was it all sort of, open?
It was all open because everyone sees everything differently. You're always bringing whatever baggage you have to an experience, right? So I did use certain things, like there are certain lines in the novel that I repeat just to ground the reader. So there's one line that says there's a guy at a grill and he turns over a piece of brisket and he says, "Yo, look at that meat." And it was a good enough line of dialogue, like it was punchy enough that it would stick in a reader's mind. And so I repeated that, I think, 3 times in the novel, just so that the reader would be like, oh, here we are. We're at that place where Damien says, "Yo, look at that meat." And now we're going to look at this scene from a different perspective. And that's something that's just sort of solid and grounded. And there's no interpretation of that line except in that way. But in most cases, people would look at the characters would look at things and there would be a difference to them.
Now, are you continuing to explore perspective in what you're working on now, or is this sort of you're moving on?
Oh my goodness. I always try something new with every novel. And this time I'm working on a novel that's called What Happened Next. And the difference for this novel is that I only have one point of view character, which is the first time I've done that. And it's written in the first person present. And it's like a whole different way of telling us. It's a whole different way of telling a story. Everything has to be filtered through that one character or that one character's imagination, and that character has to be completely honest. I think for this novel to work, that character has to be completely honest as a narrator, and it's just a completely different way to write. So that's been really exciting to do.
Now, are you thinking of the reader when you put these stories together? As you're writing it, do you think about what the reader's going to think?
Oh yeah, I do that probably after my first draft. When I'm writing the first draft, I'm really just trying to figure out how all of the pieces fit together and what the characters are doing, what the plot is, that kind of stuff. How I'm gonna get to my word count. But then I really start thinking about the reader in the subsequent drafts. And like, for example, with this novel, there are 6 point of view characters and they're all told from the first person. And so I wanted to make sure that I was signaling enough to the reader so that there wouldn't be confusion over who the narrator was in a certain section. I certainly wanted a reader who put the novel down and picked it up to remember who the narrator was at that point, if they were like sort of in the middle of a section or whatever. And so I did, I was really careful in crafting so that there were enough signals at the beginning of chapters so that you knew who the narrator was, that there were enough in the book building process, that there were enough pieces of the book that would tell the reader who the narrator was. So like each section begins with the narrator's name or role in the novel, and then each chapter begins with the character being named in some way.
Yeah, it's quite a process, How do you get into the mindset of each of your characters, being that they're all kind of, in a way, they're all reporting something from a different point of view? Do you know, they're seeing it in their way. So without mixing up the characters or some emotions and stuff, that must be really difficult too.
It was. What was fun about this, my novels before this one had been told from multiple points of view, where, like a more traditional way where, there'd be a chapter from one character, a chapter from another character. What I loved about this style of format of storytelling was that I almost wrote each section like it was a long, short story. And then I structured each section like you would with a novel with a traditional 3-act structure. So each, like Farley, who's the first character, he's the psychiatrist. His section is about 50 pages long, and it has a inciting incident, it has a midpoint, it has 2 plot points, and it has a climax. And the climax is a climax that has a story question at the end because it leads into the next section, of course. What was really fun about doing that was, I stayed with a character for a while. So 50 pages is a long time to stay with a character, so you can really, really get into their mindset. You can really get into their voice. But it also, by structuring each of the sections with all of those plot points, it added a lot. It added so much tension to the novel. So now I have a novel that has a midpoint. The whole novel has a midpoint, but I also have a novel where there are actually 6 other midpoints. So the novel is constantly sort of having reversals in it.
Edwin, I feel like I could share this interview with some of my students because I constantly get questions about structure and point of view. And I bet you do too. And so I'm just going to ask a teacherly question. When you're working with students, do you explore point of view with them or help them with these sorts of issues?
Oh gosh, yeah, that's what I spend most of my time on. I think understanding structure is one of those tools that once you understand it really well, once you understand the 3-act structure, whatever you're planning to use, it helps you understand the process of storytelling. And of course, like any of these tools, once you understand it really well, you can throw parts of it out the window if it doesn't support your story. But it does help you sort of build and construct a novel. And once I really started getting into structure, it really helped me. It helped me build novels in a different way, so that it was just easier for me. It helps me break. One of the challenges of writing a novel, period, is that it's long. It's a very, very long document. And so what structure allows you to do is to always have something to write toward. So if you're writing toward your plot point 1, your plot point 1 comes about a quarter or a third of the way through the novel. And so if you're writing toward that plot point 1, the only thing that you need to do is get to page 75 to 100. You don't need to get to page 300, which is like such a daunting task. And so that's one of the things that I use with my students as far as structure goes. I help them break up their larger works into smaller pieces so that they're always working towards something.
Yeah, I think that I'm so glad to hear that, when you're teaching structure, and I'm a proponent of discussing it. It's not something, certainly in my own education, we discussed all that much. It was more sort of just get it on the page, go more, you're sort of the pantser, so to speak, just write and figure it out later. But I think, in my experience, it sounds like perhaps I'm curious about your own. Were you always interested in structure, or did you kind of come to this after, a more of a, writing into something approach?
Oh, definitely I came to it after a writing into something approach. When I did my MFA, I don't think we talked about structure at all either. I mean, with an MFA programs are designed for, not, this is like a big generalization, but in general, MFA programs are designed for short story writing because it's a lot easier to workshop a short story. It's a complete piece of work. You can talk about the whole thing. You can improve the whole thing. Novels are so much more challenging to workshop, right? Because you're just looking at, in a traditional workshop, you're only looking at a piece of them. And so as the person being workshopped, it can be frustrating because you're only looking at a piece of it. So one of the things that I'm always trying to do with my students who are almost always exclusively working on novels is to workshop in a way that we're still only looking at a piece of the work, but in a way where we look at the work holistically. And one of the ways that we do that is through structure, and not necessarily outline, but like thinking about what the other pieces are, and like and letting your reader, as in the other people in the workshop, know what those other pieces are, so that they can kind of think about the novel as a whole, even as
How do you keep the tension of the suspense going throughout a book so that people stay on the edge? What do you do?
Oh, I mean, I use this. I mean, this is not my concept, but I use this concept of story questions. And a story question is just where the story poses a question to the reader, and then you have to decide when the question is answered. And that's how I create tension, because sometimes you have story questions that are answered immediately, like you'll end a chapter with a story question, like, is Edwin going to finish this sentence? And then in the next paragraph, in the next chapter, Edwin finishes the sentence. That's a story question. But another type of story question is one that could be answered at the end of, say, at the end of a plot point. So maybe the entire first section of your novel is about figuring out who killed someone, and you think that it is John who killed someone. And at the end of that section, we discover that John actually has an alibi. And so now we've just answered the story question, did John kill someone? No, he didn't, because he has an alibi. And then other story questions you use the entire book to answer, right? Like, who killed Edwin? Like, we get all the way to the end of the book and we answer that question. And so that's what I try and do. Like, one author I really love who uses story questions so well and in such an interesting way is a guy named Peter Swanton, who wrote The Kind Worth Killing. He's written a lot of books, but that's the one he's most well known for. And one of the things I love about his writing is he poses so many story questions, and he poses story questions that could be an entire novel, and then he answers them in like the next chapter. And so you're always kind of creating this level of tension within the novel by ratcheting up like what the reader is asking the entire time.
What do you think you get out of doing each one of these novels? Does it change you in some sort of way?
Oh my gosh, that is such an interesting question. Well, I like this. I mean, I have to tell you that writing a novel is a hugely frustrating experience. It takes a long time. There's a lot of self-doubt. And then all of a sudden it comes together in the end and you feel amazing. And you feel amazing because you've created this entire world with these imaginary people in this, sort of living in this world and doing what you've decided that they should be doing. And it is immensely, immensely satisfying. As far as like how it's changed me, I mean, I feel like I've become a better writer. This is my fifth novel, Who to Believe, and I feel like I've become a better writer over the course of writing these 5 novels. I mean, I love all of my novels, but I feel like I have really improved my storytelling skills. So that is really exciting as well.
What do you think is, do you feel like for each book there's a different inspirational point? You've mentioned at the beginning of the episode a couple of inspirations for Who to Believe. Do you feel as though you could look to each book and pluck out different inspirations, or do you think it's more complex than that?
Like different inspirations for the actual plot?
Well, I mean, theme, plot, I guess maybe any all of the above.
Gosh, it's so funny when you It's hard to, like, writing a novel is almost like exercising. You almost can't forget, you can't remember the process after a while. But so like my first novel was like so many authors. My first novel, which is called Little Comfort, the first in the Hester Thursby series, it was such a labor of love and persistence. It took me, I started in 2010 and I got it. Yeah, I started at the end of 2010 and I sold it at the end of 2016. So it took me, a number of years to write, a number of years to revise, and a number of years to actually sell. The process for that novel. I'd written another novel that never sold when I first got out of my MFA program, but that novel was, the whole process there was teaching myself how to do it. It's like you don't learn how to write a novel in 1 second. You have to practice and you have to fail and you have to practice some more and then succeed a little bit. And so it took me a while to figure out just what I was doing. Then it took me a while to get all of the pieces in place, like finding an agent, finding a publisher, and all of that kind of stuff. So that novel is sort of like its own thing. And I think most people would say that about their first novels. And then my second novel, I had this like enormous job. I was the vice president at a big publishing company. And it was like the most stressful job in the world. And it wasn't, but for me, it was very stressful. And so my second novel, like many people, I'm suddenly writing a novel on deadline, and it was like crazy. So I had to really plan that novel very, very carefully. I had to get up at like 3 a.m. every day and work on it, and then go to my crazy job at the publishing house. That novel was sort of unique too. And then the next couple, one I wrote during the pandemic, and I think anyone who wrote a novel during the pandemic remembers that it was just so hard to concentrate on anything. So I guess what I'm saying in a very long-winded way is that each of them has been so unique, and like a lot of them have been sort of dependent on where I was in my life and where I was in my writing process.
You think you'll return to Hester Thursby?
Oh, yeah. I think I might do that. I just wrote a short story called Thursby in White, and it's on my website if anyone wants to see it. It's edwin-hill.com. And it was a Christmas story, and I really enjoyed returning to her. I think she's a really fun character. She's tough, and she reminds me of myself a little bit. And she has a partner named Morgan, a husband named Morgan, but she works with a police detective named Angela White, who's appeared in many of my novels. And I really like the interplay between the two of them. So I would love to return to them and kind of expand on this short story at some point. It's set in Harvard. It's set at Harvard, and it involves it's set over Christmas, and it involves. There was a news story a few months ago. I don't know if it got any national play, but there were some people who were stealing body parts from the cadaver sites at Harvard. So anyway, we'll see if that goes anywhere.
That sounds very Christmassy.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So what do you consider your strong points in writing? What is it that seems to be more natural for you? And what other things are really hard for you?
Oh, that's a good one. Well, I am an idiot savant when it comes to logic. I don't know if you've ever taken the GRE or the LSAT. Do you remember those puzzles where it'd be like there were 6 people at dinner and 5 of them had chicken cacciatore and 1 had chicken parm, and who had tiramisu for dessert? Do you remember those types of things? Anyway, like I'm a total idiot savant at those. I can. It's like the only thing that I'm actually good at in the world. And so I love logic, and I love seeing how things fit together. I love the puzzle of the mystery, and so I do think that one of my stronger points my stronger abilities when it comes to writing. I like the way. I love to see how all of the pieces finally fall together. I don't always know how they're going to fall together, but I like to work through how they're all going to fall together. I think I'm pretty good at humor too. There's always this underlying humor that I think is funny in my novels, and whether you think it's funny, I don't know. Like humor, of course, is so subjective. So I would never call my novels humorous, but I do think that they are. I think they're humorous, and sometimes people will tell me that as well. What would be the thing that most challenges me? I think what I'm going to say about this is I have written 5 novels now that are all set over 2 or 3 days. They have very tight plots. Part of that is for tension. I think one of the great ways of building tension in a novel is to compress the timeline. But one of the challenges I'm going to put forward for myself, for not the novel I'm working on now, but the one after that, is to extend the timeline and probably tell the story in a dual timeline, so maybe in the 90s and in the present day. So I'm sort of like expanding the scope of the novel. That's what I would like to do, is have a novel with a larger scope to it.
And when you get into the characters so much, like when you're doing one section of one character and you kind of really are living through them, you're going through the emotions of it and that stuff. Do you think that affects you in your personal life as well?
Oh no, I write about terrible, terrible people, and about if I let it impact me, it'd be if I let them infect me, it'd be trouble.
I know that feeling.
So, what are you working on now? I mean, you mentioned you're working on a novel. You're in the midst of it. Can you talk about it, or is that taboo?
Sure.
Or
no. So this novel is set in New Hampshire. It's set in a lake town in New Hampshire, and it's about a young man who starts to investigate a crime that impacted his family. But he investigates the crime with a woman, a former TV star who was on a Law and Order type show. So think Mariska Hargitay, and that show made an episode of the TV series about a crime that affected his family. And so it's sort of like Castle meets Three Pines, I think is a good way of describing it. And so it has series potential. I'm curious. As I'm working on it, I wish I was polishing it, but I'm not polishing it. I'm still sort of figuring out what it is. As I'm working on it, I'm trying to decide whether I want to protect my core cast, which is something you have to do in a series novel, or if I kind of want to just kill off whoever I want to, So that will be sort of the ultimate decision on whether I try to turn it into a series or not.
that is a constant sort of issue with series versus standalone. And although I'm writing a trilogy, it's not a series, and I kind of know what it's all going to be about. But if I ever decide to write a series, that idea of having to protect your core cast, that there are characters you cannot get rid of, and even at some point, if you get further along in the series, characters that would upset readers if you did get rid of them. Do you like that challenge, or is that frustrating, or what do you think? I'm not sure how I feel about it, that's why I'm asking.
Oh, I kind of like both. I mean, writing a series is like it's sort of like TV. When you watch a TV show, everything is middle. Like a TV show is all middle because the writers are trying to get you to watch the next episode, right? Not a limited series, but like an ongoing TV series. And so when you write a successful successful mystery series, there's a lot of middle there. Even though each novel is going to have its own arc, it's going to have its own beginning, middle, and end. It will have a midpoint and plot points and all of those things. You still need to have those story questions that kind of bring you from novel A to novel B. They can't be so frustrating that the reader's feeling like they're leaving on a cliffhanger. And you also, this is the benefit of writing a series, is you stay with a character, like I stayed with Esther Thursby. You get to see that character grow over a series of novels. And it's fun to sort of map those out and sort of see where you want the character to go. Like when in the Hester Thursby series, Hester has a boyfriend at the beginning. By the end, they're married, and it was fun to sort of map out the trajectory of their very troubled but very loving relationship. And it was fun to see her grow as a character in a way that I wouldn't have been able to see in a single novel. So that's really fun. But then the flip side of that is standalone novels are generally about the very most important thing that has ever happened to a protagonist. And so if you're able, in a standalone, if you're able to tell yourself, this is the very most important thing that ever happened to this protagonist, you can really throw the kitchen sink at that protagonist and really ratchet up the tension. With a series, of course, you're constantly trying to create those important things that happen to a character, but they can't all be the most important thing that happens.
That would be me, the most important thing. This book now, Who to Believe, it's set in a small town. Do you like working small town crime sort of thrillers because of the uniqueness of relationships in a small town?
I did for this one. So most of my novels before this one, one was set in a small town before this, but most of them have been set in Boston, which is a city of neighborhoods, but it is a city. But this one I wanted to move to a very, very small town because one of the really key elements about the novel is the idea of people knowing each other and of having a small community. When I was growing up, my dad was the principal of my high school. When you are in a role like that, you're both a part of the community. And I grew up in a town very much like the one depicted in this story. When you grow up in a town like that, and you have a role like principal or police chief or whatever, it's just an interesting view of the community because you both are part of the community, you live in the community, obviously, but you also sort of sit over the community in a way because you know things about people that ordinary citizens don't know. And so one of the things that I did with these characters that are all at this party is they all have an interesting view of the community, and they have an interesting view of each other because of it. So the people who are at the party are a psychiatrist, a police chief, a financial planner, a minister, and a documentary filmmaker. So they're all kind of looking at the world through a lens, like a documentary filmmaker would, and they're seeing the society, their community, in a different way.
What happens to your characters when your book's done?
Well, I just kind of put them aside, and some of them are dead. I hate to tell you. Some of them are dead. Some of them have been packed off to jail. Various things.
It's like, I don't know. I mean, it is funny when you write something, you do kind of have to move beyond it. I think maybe it's even true for series. I mean, you're coming back to series, but I don't know about you, but I think some writers don't want to leave their characters behind. I'm kind of happy to have a break. It's like going to a great party, but knowing when to leave.
John's a love 'em and leave 'em guy.
I mean, I'm
a love 'em, yeah.
This will be my 6th novel in 7 years. So once you're into a novel, it's like you can't really think about anything else just because it's so all encompassing. I was actually I was doing a panel at a conference, and the panel was about a book that I had written that book and it had been published. I had written another book and that one had been published, and I was working on a 3rd book. So we were talking about a book that was 2 books earlier, and the panel, the moderator asked me like a total softball question about it, and I just kind of looked at him with dumbfounded, and I was for 5 seconds I could not remember one thing about the book. Then thankfully some things came back to me. So
yeah, I think that and I don't know if you would agree that it because of the intensity of particularly, I mean, you've produced a lot in a few years, and that intensity has to you require a break at some point. Do you take a break, or do you just start right up with the next novel? Do you jump right back in, or do you have to kind of have a weekend away at least or something?
I haven't, and I think I really need to. So I'm at the end of my contract with this book I'm turning in. So I'm going to take I don't know how long, but I'm going to take a breather after that. In 2024. One thing I work, and writing takes a lot of time. So I do find that I wind up being a little insular and spending a lot of time by myself. So one of the things I'd really like to do is finish this book and then reconnect with some human beings for a little while. Yeah.
Go take a breather, go to a lake and hang out.
That's exactly right. Just don't get frustrated while you're there.
So listen, do you like to do social media, and you've mentioned a website and all that? How do you like readers to find you, interact?
Oh, you can go to my website, which is edwin-hill.com. And then I'm on the social medias as Edwin, Edwin Hill Author, at Edwin Hill Author. So you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
No TikTok yet, eh?
I have not crossed that bridge. I'm not, I will say I'm not a big social media person. You know, I try to do it. I like to connect, I like to see folks that I don't normally get to see, catch up with them, which is always fun. So I love to hear from people, and if anyone wants to follow me, that would be great.
Well, there you go. Well, we'll put all that up on our website as well, so people can find you, hunt you down, send you dirty emails.
Please don't.
Oh my.
Liven up the stuff. Get some humor out of that. Actually, and when you mentioned humor, right? Your sense of humor, it might be more subtle or hidden, but do you still have to put it in the right sense, the right timing?
Yeah, and that's the humor that's a piece. When the humor starts coming out in a novel, I know that I'm almost done, because I feel like that with me, the humor is really about connecting ideas, and sort of building on the ideas so that they, like, when they're humorous, the humor builds. And that only happens late in the writing process, and it only happens once I have really solidified what the story is.
Okay, then. Well, thank you very much for being on the show. And now the book we're talking about is Who to Believe? A Twisting Domestic Thriller. And that's Edwin Hill. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This was great.
Thanks, Edwin.
Thanks, John.
You've been listening to the House of Mystery radio show. To find out more about our guests, hosts, or show, go to www.houseofmystery.com.
Show's over for now.
Was it as good for you as it was for me?
Yeah. Good night.
This has been a production of Something Weird Media.
I'll be back.